because it's probably going to be one that is fairly intense. I thought I would ask us to have to do our joys and concerns first thing. This is a topic, pronouns and gender identity, that's probably going to be intense and confusing enough that I don't think we could switch gears and go back into joy and concerns easily. So I am going to ask if anybody has any joys and concerns. And David, if you could spotlight them, if that's possible, or whatever it is you normally do in joy and concerns.
When they talk, do we spotlight it?
It looks like Margot.
That there's obituary for James Wilson, and I don't know if anybody else read it. He was a member a long time ago, and he lived at Heron Point, and he gave us generous checks, and he was a nice man. And he died after a 10-year battle with Alzheimer's. And I just would light a candle because he was a nice guy.
Yeah, I definitely remember him. That's sad.
Should I just say something? I have a sentence.
Go ahead, Annie.
Yes.
Jim used to ride his bicycle sometimes from Heron Point to our church. And so you can imagine this dapper man, short gray hair, very dapper on his bicycle. It was just marvelous, and he was lovely. And it just reminds me of the people that have been with us and have moved on through moving away or illness or death or whatever, but their spirit is still part of our beloved community.
You know, there was a technique that I learned with respect to people saying things that you deeply disagree with, but that you want to start a dialogue with. And it's not a very emotionally easy thing to do, but we learned it in connection with race issues, and we used the letters RACE to remember how to do it. And R standard for reflect, which is when the person says a thing that you disagree with, reflect in your own heart about your own reaction. And then the A standard for ask. Ask a genuine question that you actually want to know. And then find a way to connect, which C was for connect, to their answer. It may not necessarily mean that you agree, but you can find some way of having a connection with them and sharing something. Sometimes that's the hardest part. And then finally, once you have established some rapport, then try to expand and tell them your experience. So that would be the E, is expand and focus on experience. So I don't know if any of that would work, but the general feeling is if someone is very, very, very diametrically opposed to you and you want to have a dialogue, don't start with the disagreement.
Yeah.
Start with understanding your own reaction and then finding something you have in common.
Thank you.
Any other concerns?
Can I go ahead? Well,
Yep.
This is not a concern. This is a joy, and it's the obvious one. It's been a beautiful week out there, and that's been a joy.
Yes. If there are no more concerns, I'm going to light one extra candle for all of the concerns that we've heard and the ones that are inside our hearts. I'm dropping wax on my notes as I speak. Oops. Okay. I think I should have said a prayer or done something, but I didn't think of that. So I'm just going to say our joys and concerns are over. And now we're moving into a discussion roughly titled Gender Pronouns and Gender Identity. Thought that what I would do is introduce the topic for maybe about 15 minutes. And then we would open it up to general discussion that's sort of about the information that I've introduced, because I think you'll have some questions. So I'll go through like a mini presentation, and then you'll probably have questions about what I've presented. But I wanted to save the last 15 or 20 minutes of it to talk about how we respond to this topic. Because I think the most important thing to talk about first is how this topic makes us personally as individuals feel. My experience is that everybody has a really strong emotional reaction to it. I might be wrong, but I don't think I am. So half of this, we're going to talk about the stuff in our head about this, and the other half, I'd like to talk about how we feel when we talk about this stuff. The only reason I am doing this, I would like to be a role model for everybody else as how to be clueless, because I am definitely not an expert. I am absolutely 98% clueless about this. And so I want to bring to you guys my sense of, I don't know what I'm doing. Because that's probably how you feel about this topic for a long time when you first begin to think of it. So the only expertise I have, or how I got connected to this topic, is my daughter, my only child. We have, John has a son from his first marriage, who's my beloved stepson, but I have one daughter, and she is bisexual. Her pronouns are she and her, but she has a roommate and a dear friend whose name is Hillary, who uses the pronouns they and them. So about 5 years ago, Hillary came into our life, and I had to start getting used to using the gender pronouns they and them for Hillary, and I still suck at it. I am terrible at doing this, but I'm still trying. And one of the reasons I'm trying is Hillary has been great to Elizabeth. We had a couple times when Elizabeth was physically distant from us and needed help, and it was always Hillary that helped her. At one point, Elizabeth got mugged at gunpoint. She lives in West Philly, and that kind of stuff happens. Anyway, Hillary has more than once been the person who was helping my only child when she needed help. So she means a great deal to me, and I would rather cut off my hand than do something that hurt her. And my daughter explained that if I didn't try hard to use these pronouns, it would hurt Hillary. It would make her feel disrespected. So I had no idea what I was doing 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm still bad at it. But that's why this matters to me, is because I don't want to ever make Hillary feel as if I do not respect them. And hey, I just did it. I used the them and they, which was even hard. I had to think of it really tough. I was so unsure of myself doing this discussion that I called my daughter yesterday and said, I don't think I should do this. I don't know enough. And here's what she said. She said, Mom, just tell him that this is your goal, that in this discussion, we all get our sea legs and we have a chance to put our foot in our mouth when it won't necessarily damage a relationship irretrievably. So that's my goal for today, is that we can get our sea legs and none of us have to be perfect. And if we're gonna put our foot in our mouth, we can do it here among our beloved community, where we know that we love each other. And so that if we run into this situation out in the world for the first time, we won't feel quite so new at it. We'll have a little bit of sea legs. So one thing I do want to ask before I show you a couple things, some information, is there anybody here who uses pronouns differently than the norm of she and her and he and him? Is there anybody who's more of an expert at this than I am? Whether you use different pronouns or you have someone close or you're good at this.
I don't see any raised hands, Mary.
Because along with feeling arrogant that as bad as I am at this, that I volunteered to lead this discussion, I suddenly went last night, oh, maybe there's someone who's good at this in the discussion and we should give them the floor. So if you have any experience, feel free to chime in. To question gender, in my experience so far, once I started just trying to use different pronouns and educating myself a little bit of it, is a fundamental restructuring, a reordering of our world. It is like the thread on a sweater that you start to pull thinking you're just pulling a tiny thread off and it ends up unraveling the whole sweater. So as I began to try and think about pronouns, that led me to the next part of the thread, which was how does one think about oneself in terms of gender? And as soon as I opened that, there were all kinds of questions, like hundreds and hundreds of questions that I'd never asked myself before. And it reminded me a little bit, some of you know that I used to be a cultural diversity speaker and workshop leader. And one of the definitions we had for culture was that it was unspoken rules among a group about how we do things around here. And that the very first rule of most cultures is don't talk about the rules. And as I was beginning to open the very complicated box of gender identity, I said, oh, we really don't talk about the rules of gender identity. We never say why we think we're a woman or a man. That's just, in my experience, not something one talks about. It's just a given. And because that's such a strong norm, if we're going to talk even about pronouns, we're probably going to start to begin to feel uncomfortable. So I'm just giving you the sort of rough road ahead. If you're willing to think about this, there'll be times when you find it difficult. I've done just a smidgen of reading, probably 6 or 7 hours worth of reading on this topic. And my sense is the whole field is still so at its beginning and its formation that you'll find experts saying X or Y or Z. But there are serious people who are writing and thinking carefully about this. And having read a few of them, I would say that we have reasons to keep our gender categories strict. And some of those reasons are biological, and some of those reasons are cultural, and some of those reasons are cognitive. Now, mind you, I'm not telling you that I want those categories strict. I'm kind of telling you the opposite. Once we allow ourselves to use different pronouns, we allow ourselves to consider that there might be something other than two categories, male and female. And if we do that, Katie bar the door, as my mother used to say. So once I did a bit of reading, I decided that I was probably not politically correct enough to ever be good at this, because I noticed that I remain uncomfortable. So I've had a friend, or my daughter's friend, who's been asking me to use pronouns differently for 5 years. And I've been trying to educate myself about this for 5 years, and I am still emotionally uncomfortable about the whole issue. And as soon as I begin to look at how we have come to understand our gender, I say, oh, of course I'm uncomfortable. So my journey is that I'm going to keep trying to do this and keep trying to understand people who ask for this, because, how do I say this? I feel gender so deep, it's so fundamental, and it's so uncomfortable for me to try to let loose of that. But if I just begin to take that feeling and turn it with an empathy lens to other people, and I realize if you were a person whose body said you were female, but your brain said you were male, imagine the level of discomfort there. If me, cisgendered Marilee, looks female, feels female, is attracted, is heterosexual, if I'm uncomfortable once I'm talking about this, imagine what it would be like to live in a permanent mismatch with what your culture said. How many times a day you would feel deeply misidentified, and how painful that would be. So I use that deep discomfort that I have in my heart and in my gut, and I try to put it in an empathy jar, because I do know and have opened myself to listen to people whose stories I believe. And there is immense pain if you don't fit into the categories that our culture tells us we must. So I guess what I want to mainly bring here is an acknowledgement of discomfort and putting that into an empathy jar for the people for whom gender makes them deeply in pain all the time because of what the culture says and does with them. Now with that, I'm going to show you a 3-minute video. If I can get this right, I'm going to hit screen share and then probably fumble around a little bit, and we'll watch a 3-minute video that I think would be helpful to start with. So let me see if I can do this. Here we go.
They're the easiest way to acknowledge someone's identity. And in order to respect all humans, it's crucial to use the correct ones. So here's our guide to using the right gender pronouns. Let's kick off with some important definitions. Gender identity. Your gender identity is a way to describe how you feel about your gender. This is one's internal sense of self as a man, woman, both, neither, or something else. Gender neutrality. Gender neutrality is all about not making assumptions on someone's gender identity based on the way they look or act. Okay, so now we've got the definitions down, let's take a look at some of the most common gender
Live and on demand.
Oh no!
Now including these favorites. YouTube TV. Try it free.
pronouns. There's such a wonderful world beyond binary. One of the most common gender-neutral pronouns used by genderqueer and gender non-conforming people is they, them, their. But it's certainly not the only option. So let me explain. Some people use the gender-neutral pronouns ze, here, his, and other people use theirs. There's absolutely loads of gender-neutral pronouns out there. If you want to know more information about them, head to our description and click on the link. Now, here's some tips for using and understanding genderqueer or non-binary pronouns. Enjoy! Never assume a pronoun. If you're meeting someone for the first time and don't know which pronouns to use, just ask the person you're chatting to. It'll go a little something like this. Hello, new human that I'm meeting in a pub. I'm Libby. Nice to meet you, Libby. I'm Alex. If you don't mind me asking, Alex, what pronouns do you use? Good question, Libby. I use they, their. What about you? Oh, thanks for asking. I use she, her. Anyway, should we get a pint? It's that simple. And if you're meeting a bunch of people, you can apply the same gender-neutral language. Instead of saying ladies or guys, try to incorporate language that isn't gendered, such as folks, pals, or friends. Basically, just don't go around assuming pronouns. Don't be that person. Of course, there might be times when you slip up and get a pronoun wrong. We get it. Mistakes happen. Don't deal out of it, say sorry, correct yourself, and move on. The best apology is not doing it again. An even better apology is to become an ally. If you overhear someone using the wrong pronouns for a mutual friend, correct them. Be the ally that the non-binary, genderqueer, and trans people in your community deserve. You should also bring your new ally status to work. Encourage your colleagues to start using their preferred gender pronouns at the start of meetings, or include a place for pronouns on your name tags or badges. You can even buy pre-made pronoun stickers, and they are pretty damn fabulous. This will all help towards normalising the idea that people shouldn't just assume that they can tell someone's pronoun based on the traditional gendering of a name. So there you have it. Thank you for watching our very brief guide to using the right gender pronouns. What pronouns do you go by? Let us know in the comments. Bye-bye.
Okay, now I am going to show you another couple of, and then, oh, but first I'm going to stop my YouTube. I'm going to show you a couple other things. So I'm going to read this to you. It's a little racy, but I thought it was the quickest, most blunt way to get into a whole big issue. It was a Facebook post, and I'm going to read it if it's not large enough for you here. Let me just see if I can make that a little bigger. So this is a Facebook post. I just saw a transphobic post that was like, in a sexual species, females have 2 X chromosomes and males have an X and a Y. I'm not a bigot, it's just science. I'm a science teacher, so I commented thus. First of all, in a sexual species, you can have females be XX and males be X. Insects, you can have females be ZW and males be ZZ, birds. You can have females be females because they developed in a warm environment, and males be males because they developed in a cool environment, reptiles. You can have females be females because they lost a penis sword fighting contest, some flatworms. You can have males be males because they were born female but changed sexes because the only male in their group died, parrotfish and clownfish. You can have males look and act like females because they're trying to get close enough to actual females to mate with them, cuttlefish, bluegills, and others. Or you can be one of thousands of sexes, slime mold, and some mushrooms. Oh, did you mean humans? Oh, okay then. You can be male because you were born female, but you have a 5-alpha reductase deficiency, so you grew a penis at age 12. You can be female because you have an X and a Y chromosome, but you're insensitive to androgens, and so you have a female body. You can be female because you have an X and a Y chromosome, but your Y is missing the SRY gene and you have a female body. You can be male because you have 2 X chromosomes, but one of your X's have an SRY gene, and so you have a male body. You can be male because you have 2 X chromosomes, but also a Y. You can be female because you have only 1 X chromosome at all. And you can be male because you have 2 X chromosomes, but your heart and brain are male. And vice effing versa. Don't use science to justify your bigotry. The world is way too weird for that shit. Pardon me, but that's what they say. And obviously I don't have a reference for this, and I'm sure there's a better scientific reference, but hopefully this will again spike your curiosity enough to go find out if this is true or not. But it sounded pretty convincing to me. And I read in another set of articles that in the US population, there are an estimated 700,000 people for whom their gender presentation does not match their chromosomals. 700,000 people probably fall in some kind of category that the second half of this paragraph made. And it just boggled my mind that we would balk at changing our language a bit so that 700,000 people might not be utterly othered. I'm now going to show you one more thing, and I found this maybe the most helpful thing you could possibly have. If I had one visual I was going to show you today, it was going to be the genderbread person. And I just thought this was a really helpful way to get some categories around this very complex topic. And I'll just go over it briefly with you. Some of you may have seen it. So gender identity is how in your head you define your gender based on how much you align or don't align with what you understand the options for gender. Caitlyn Jenner, who was previously Bruce Jenner, said this once, and I thought it was a very helpful thing to say. They said, gender identity, sexual orientation is who you want to go to bed with. Gender identity is who you go to bed as. And just that one sentence I found very easy to remember. And I went, oh, if you go to bed thinking you're something, I just said, oh. Gender expression. Now this one, we could do a whole thing about gender expression, is just how you act. It says the ways you present gender through your actions, dress, and demeanor, and how those presentations are interpreted based on gender norms. So, you know, if you're a woman, you realize you're being really girly girl is the best expression that I have. Like, there are certain things, like if I go to the opera, I'm going to dress up. If I come to church, I'm going to be a little further on the girly girl spectrum than I am when I'm gardening. So all of us have some fluidity in how we're expressing gender in what is easily apparent. So if you want to, you know, the words girly girl or manning up or all that kind of stuff, we realize that we're all moving a little bit on that spectrum all the time. Then there's biological sex, the physical sex characteristics you're born with and develop, including genitals, body shape, voice pitch, body hair, hormones, and chromosomes. And if you remember that last Facebook post, you can understand that your chromosomes may actually not even match with your physical body. That's the biological sex. And then the bottom variable is who you're sexually or romantically attracted to. A lot of folks call that sexual orientation. I kind of like this language because I know that sexual attraction and romantic attraction overlap, but they're not always synonymous. And I think often people assume that gender identity is somehow related to sexual orientation. And my very frail understanding is these two things can be quite different. And I did not know that 5 years ago. And I'm still beginning to understand it. And frankly, there is a lot of still discovery going on in the field, even among people acknowledged to be experts. There are differences in terminology. Some people identify as non-binary, that's one word. Other people identify as gender queer, and there's a bit of controversy even between those two things. So wanting to present something neat and settled to you was an impossible task. There is still a good bit of disagreement about a lot of this, even within the framework of people understanding that gender is more fluid than our traditional norms. Okay, I think I'm gonna put in the chat a reading list, but I'm also gonna open us up for discussion. And it's 10:37, so it took longer as usual. So I guess maybe let's just take 5 minutes for people to have, if you have any immediate comments or questions about what we just saw.
I had a question. How do you know when the person wants to be talked to as a they person or a them person? How do you recognize it? Do you have to tell you that, or Is there a way you can recognize it easily?
I don't think there's a visual way to recognize that. There in that video, it said, I believe the conversation started. Somebody said, "Hi, I'm Alex," and the other person said, "If you don't mind me asking, how would you like? What are the pronouns you're comfortable with?" I think that's what they said.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have a good idea?
I am working with the city administrator of Salisbury, Maryland, and she identifies as she, her. What I've learned is that if people do want to be addressed as they, them, they typically put it in their signatures. Now, I know that doesn't help when you are just meeting someone face to face, but it's become a recognition in signatures in business, actually. So that's one thing to just be aware of.
That's very helpful.
Mary Lee, this is sort of like, is this a problem with the English language? I mean, I forget because it's been a long time, but like in Spanish and stuff, didn't they have more neutral pronouns?
That's a wonderful question, David. My lovely daughter, the one who's been my mentor in figuring this out, also got a degree in linguistics at Yale, so she knows all about this stuff. And she says that generally they and them has always been used for the singular if you can't determine the gender. So it's not that we don't use it, but if for some reason you're talking about an individual, like, look at what that driver did. You just saw somebody in a car do something. I can't believe they did it. And it's only one driver, but we use they and them. But there are also languages, I believe Finnish is one, where there are no genders in the pronouns. So they don't even have to worry about this.
In Spanish, it's more gender specific because, like, if you have a boy is niño, a girl is niña. If you have a group of boys and girls, it's always niños. So it's always a masculine. And it's kind of interesting that in English the plural is gender neutral, because that, I'm not an expert, so that's about the extent of my knowledge. But I do find it interesting that English has. It's gender neutral. Yeah, I always, and I'm talking about language. Oh my goodness. But yeah, English is gender neutral in the plural.
Wouldn't the onus be on the person who wants to be referenced a certain way? Like to say, no, non-judgmentally, if somebody started saying she or her, just to say, I go by they or them or something like that. I think to assume other person's identity is tricky business. I think it's up to the person themselves to helpfully tell the world, I'm a they or them.
And Annie, my sense right now is that is very much true, that anybody who wants to have a pronoun that is not what we've been used to will let you know.
Okay.
But the problem is, and my experience is that usually what happens is someone who knows them tells you about it first, so that you don't necessarily have to have the conversation. One of the things Elizabeth has done with me when I continue to fail or forget is she gently reminds me, and she also helps me notice how tiring it is to have to remind someone over and over again. So if there's a person who's asking you to use gender neutral pronouns, try to make them only ask for it once. Because if you multiply how many conversations they have to have about this over and over again, and how many times people forget, if you can be told once and then try to get it right, And I get it wrong, but I just notice I get it wrong, quickly apologize and move on.
I know my son works for setting up conventions and things like that. And now part of the registration, they ask what you want to be, how you want to be referenced.
I'm just noticing our time is 11:05. And I think that means that I should bring us to a close on this discussion. But I'm really, really, really encouraging you to go into the chat. If you don't know where chat is, it's down at the bottom of your screen, and download either a Word version or a PDF version of some links, because one of the things I put in there was a videotape of a range of people who are identifying as non-binary or genderqueer. And it's really helpful to hear a first person. One of the reasons I hesitated to do this is I really feel like we should be hearing from people whose lived experience is this, not just me, worse than third hand, I'm like fifth or sixth hand. So please open your ears either via YouTube or your own resources to how people are experiencing living in this world when their gender identity is not matching what the culture wants. And with that, I guess I will say something. I feel like I should say something official. Annie, should I say something official?
No, you can just do close, extinguish the chalice if you wish.
The chalice. And I'm saying in unison, we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
Thank you, Mary Lee.
Thank you.
Usually coffee hour, the candle's out.